So, yes, indeed. Okay, so here's our agenda for the day. There's some folks here that were here before. And what I would say is the good news and the bad news is we have the same agenda and a lot of the same content. And I think that's sort of the bad news. There's going to be some new exciting thing that happens. I think the good news is, especially knowing some of you, I think we're going to have an entirely different experience though with the material. I hope that we all have the experience of when we reflect on any of the AA literature, that it changes with every look as we change as our sobriety journey changes, we change, our insights into the literature change. So the good news is I think we've got a good, at least a proposed agenda to sort of frame out the conversation, but it'll be up to us to have a great session. I'm confident that we can do that. So what I'd love to do is start off with introductions, and then we'll make a firm landing on how we're going to handle our purpose and shared understanding for today. And then we'll address the three questions if that's what we end up doing. And the three questions would be is, what is a sponsor? How do I sponsor? And how can we support sponsorship? And then we'll wrap it up. Does that work for folks? Awesome. So what I would love to do is just start off with introductions, and I'm just going to move to my left here, and we'll start with Steve.
So it's Steve, alcoholic, and I'm here because I'd like to be a more effective sponsor. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Awesome.
I'm Judy. I'm an alcoholic, and no, he didn't smell. I just spread out.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm here to be a more effective sponsor too.
Awesome. Thank you, Judy.
Yeah, my name's Laura. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm here because I want to support. I want to learn how to be a better sponsor, and I would like to support people on becoming better sponsors.
Awesome. We're going around the room and introducing ourselves, why we're here today and what we're hoping to get out of it. So what we'll do is I'll call on folks on Zoom as you're aligned on my screen. So we'll start off with Kristen.
Hi, everybody. My name's Kristen. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm joining you from Western Maryland today. I've been looking around at a lot of different intergroup sites, just trying to enrich my own sobriety. I'd like to be a better sponsor, and I'm also I have some long-term sobriety, but I'm actually switching sponsors, so I'm eager to hear what you all have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, and great to hear that you're joining us from so far. Thank you, Mike.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike. I'm an alcoholic. I'm here today to learn more because I feel like I'm always learning something, and I like to encourage the sponsorship and what it is and what it's all about, and hopefully I will be able to help others too. So thank you for allowing me to share.
Thanks, Mike. Jennifer.
Hey, good morning. My name is Jennifer. I'm an alcoholic. I am in District 14, which is in Area 72, Western Washington. It's West Seattle, White Center, and Vashon. And I'm currently serving as a corrections chair for the district. So one of the topics that we talked about at our quarterly has to do with pamphlet changes towards sponsorship for people in custody. So I thought this might be a good place to come and see if any of that stuff comes up during the conversation. And I'm a big fan of the pamphlets. So that's why I'm here. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. Jeffrey.
Hi, Jeff, alcoholic. I'm here because I've yet to sponsor anyone, but I'm sort of at the point in my program where it's something to start doing, and I'm a little nervous about it. I thought I'd come.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeffrey. Great to hear. And we had a couple folks that have joined, one in person and one online, which is really cool, after we had already started. So what we're doing is we're just going around the room and introducing ourselves, why we're here today and what we're hoping to get out of it. So I'm going to start with the folks that joined in the room.
Morgan, I'm an alcoholic.
Morgan.
Hi, Morgan.
Morgan?
I don't know why I'm here.
Because you love us.
Yeah, I've never had any sponsees and I should, so I should probably figure out what that's all about.
Awesome. Thank you, Morgan. Tracy, online.
Hi, Tracy Alcoholic. I'm here because I've never had a sponsor before and I just want to know about it.
Awesome.
Here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So this would be the agenda that I would propose. And I didn't include sort of ground rules or ground roles, but maybe even before we do that, as we talk about our purpose and shared understanding. So I won't go into exhaustive tradition study, but just a quick reminder that we have a group conscience here that will guide us, and I get the opportunity to be a trusted servant to try to facilitate the conversation, but it's really our conversation. So I would encourage folks to participate, and whether you've I mean, some folks have never done a face-to-face meeting, right? We're in that era now, but certainly for those of us that have been in face-to-face meetings and even on some of the Zoom meetings, I just remind folks, this is still Alcoholics Anonymous. So by all means, if you're moved to speak, I'm as the facilitator, I'm giving you full permission to, if you're online, to unmute and speak. And if you're in the room, speak into the center of the room or wave your hands or whatever. I'm going to try to hopefully facilitate a conversation, but the magic will come in us sharing with each other and the light framework that we have to sort of frame the conversation. Does that work for everybody? Awesome. So like I said, this will be our agenda for the day. I do want to put in a little infomercial for the Third Legacy Committee, the Greater Seattle Atlanta Group Third Legacy Committee. That's the committee that is sponsoring today's workshop. So a couple other things that the Third Legacy Committee does that if you're interested, you could participate in, is that there is a service manual study the first Sunday of every month at 11 a.m. So the next meeting is actually a week from tomorrow. It's at 11 a.m. like I said, so you're more than welcome to attend. And my understanding, I reserve the right that I need to update it here, but that is only in person, is that correct?
The service manual study, sorry,
Yeah.
is a hybrid.
Oh, it is. So great. So for those of you even from West Maryland, you could definitely zoom in on that. I'll fix that on the slide later. Another thing that the Third Legacy Committee puts on is a tradition study, and that's the fourth Tuesday at 7 p.m. And that's in person and hybrid every month as well. We are a committee of the Greater Seattle Intergroup. So I figured I better let everyone know when the board meeting is in case you want to come say, hey, your Third Legacy chair is crazy. You need to do something about it. You can come give us feedback at the board meeting every third Tuesday. And that's also at 7 p.m. as hybrid. And then thank you for attending our quarterly sponsorship workshop. And the upcoming workshops are June 24th, the 30th, and December 9th. Those are all Saturdays at 10 a.m., just like this one. And then last but not least, we'd love to come talk to your home groups or your districts about what service is and what Third Legacy is. So that's my only infomercial for the day. And then you'll actually get what you came for, which is we'll talk about sponsorship. So a quick reminder that we have a different lens of authority in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is going to be the authority that I lean on as we do this, is the traditions. Like I said, I don't want to get too exhaustive here. Obviously, I think on some level, all 12 traditions would lend to this conversation, but I think the ones that we can key on are 2, 8, 9, and 12. And the takeaway here is that it's us, guided by our collective group conscience. So just a reminder, please help that can't shape without your participation. The other thing is that Greater Seattle Intergroup and the Greater Seattle Intergroup Third Legacy Committee has no authority to tell you what sponsorship is or isn't. We're going to try to tell you what the AA literature says about it. And then as individuals, I'm hopeful that everyone will share their own unique experience with it, but we're going to just provide sort of the broad pathway that AA says is what sponsorship is and how it works. Does that work for folks? All right.
We're gonna be referring to P15.
Look at that. You're right there.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, you're great. Thank you. So the reference, so where you could go find more information about what a sponsor is, obviously you could talk to people at meetings and that would lead to whatever that leads to. So from an Alcoholics Anonymous standpoint, we passed them out in the room. We already got a plug from someone online that they love the pamphlets. We love the pamphlets too. So this is technically pamphlet P15. It costs about 20 cents depending on where you buy it from. And it's the questions and answers on sponsorship. And what we're going to do is just walk through this pamphlet because it's, they figured it out
Can I
first.
just have a request?
Yes.
Since my computer is controlling what we see, Jennifer, do you mind putting a link in the chat for?
I'm working on it right now.
Okay, thank you so much.
Awesome. So that would be a great place to start. Obviously, the big book, Working with Others, would be another great place to look. The 12 traditions, the 12 concepts. And then because we've got a lot of great experience here, I would also just ask where else other folks would recommend that we could find reference about just informing ourselves on sponsorship.
The service manual talks about service sponsorship, which is
It
something
does.
that is interesting to me too.
Yep.
Okay, Dan.
Yeah.
Steve Alcoholic,
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time to facilitate
Yes.
this. And I'd like to share a little experience about sponsorship.
Please.
Your 3 bullet points on what we're going to look at, I think, are great and will be very helpful. And I think there could be a 4th one too.
Let's do it.
And just because of my experience, the first question to me is, do I need a sponsor? Or a new person come, you hear basically when somebody says, I'm new to AA, hey, get a sponsor, go to meetings. But why? Why do I need one? And I decided I didn't need one. So I came in 1986 and things didn't seem so difficult. Go to meetings, don't drink, you end up making friends. You end up being the, wash out the ashtrays, make coffee, eventually be a secretary and not drink. And so I figured I got this thing down. The problem was every area of my life was tubing. Disaster was around every corner. Or what would Bill say in the book, quicksand in every direction. And in my mind, I was doing everything right. And there did come a time in that 3 years where I asked a guy to be a sponsor just so I could put his name down, because in those days we had sign-up sheets at all the meetings. And we'd go out for coffee. I'd allow him to buy me coffee at a Denny's once in a while. And I would listen to what he had to say because I had, again, problems in every area of life. And if he suggested something that I would have done anyway, I'd do it. But other than that, I was, I knew what was best for me. And I didn't question that belief. I just assumed I knew what was best for me. And after 3 years, and I attended a lot of AA meetings, like way over 1,000 in the first 3 years. And I couldn't figure out why other people were getting well and I wasn't. All I could do is put on a face. And one day you mentioned the Miracle Alcoholics Anonymous. a man came up to me and he said, "Steve, I know what your problem is." And I didn't know this guy from anybody. And I just said, "What?" And he said, "You're insane." And the words didn't offend me. They went to my heart. I thought, this guy knows. And it was August of '89, so it was my 3-year anniversary. And that's all I had to go on was time, because I thought time equaled wisdom. And I said, "How much time do you have?" And he proudly said, 2 years. And my mind, it was like a tornado. How 2 years? You shouldn't even be talking to me. And I said, "How could that be?" And he said, "Well, I got well and you didn't." And he said, "Would you like to?" And just part of that story was I started crying. And we were in an AA room, with a lot of people, but the tears were coming. I thought, how come I'm not well? And he said, "Well, it has to do with sponsorship." And I said, "Well, are you suggesting that you're going to be my sponsor?" And he said, "Well, I think you're probably unsponsorable right now, but I can show you where I can tell you where I was. I can tell you what happened. I can tell you the consequences of the directions I followed and didn't follow. And I can show you what my life looks like now. Hang out with me." And at that time, I had never heard of anybody meeting with other people and what we called going through the book. And I was really, really attracted to it, because one of the first things he said was, "Do you have a big book?" And I remember I got 3 years. I said, "Well, of course I have one." And I'm thinking, it's in pristine condition. And he said, "Oh, good." He says, "Have you read it?" And, I think I did, sort of. So I just said firmly, yes. And he said, "Oh, good." He said, "So do you know what Alcoholics Anonymous says it is?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Do you know what Alcoholics Anonymous says that it is?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Well, And he said, "I actually do. Do you?" So he said, "Let's look and see." And we opened it up to the title page. And in the largest font in the whole book, big book, it says Alcoholics Anonymous, a story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And he said, "What's your story, Steve? Have you recovered?" And I said, "Nobody really recovers," because that's the message I heard. I mean, nobody really recovers. And he said, "So the whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous is starting out on a lie?"
Wow.
And I said, "Well, you can kind of make the words mean whatever you want them to." And he said, "You obviously can." But he said, "What if you just took it at face value?" He said, "What if the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is a story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism? They followed a program." And I was hooked then, because for the first time, I saw I needed a sponsor. I couldn't figure it out. And finally, I came to the same conclusion that I couldn't figure it out. And life changed from then on. And so from one alcoholic recognizing a man in Alcoholics Anonymous that was dying of untreated alcoholism and active in AA, he recognized it and offered help. And so that's why I come up with, because of my experience, I didn't know I needed one. And it was real helpful for me. I mean, it saved my life that another member of Alcoholics Anonymous recognized that and addressed it. And that's my story about that. Good to see you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you that have been here before, and I'm very hopeful that you'll be to a future workshop, we'll probably have 4 bullet points the next one. So with that said, and this is a great example about this is our group conscience, and we're gonna take our we're gonna just lean in on that. I would just open it up to other folks if anyone else either has any comments around or wants to share around why they got a sponsor, or maybe they're not sure, right? Like, I mean, anything around that bullet point that wasn't in our agenda about why a sponsor.
I'm Judy, I'm an alcoholic, and
Hey,
I just
Judy.
wanted to say thank you, Steve, that was wonderful. Because I think that too, that it says it recovered, ED, not ING, and everybody says, well, I'm recovering now. It's like, no, if you do the steps and you're supposed to be recovered, that's kind of like it says it right there in black and white, and you should claim that. I mean, if you don't have that, get it. And I don't think it means that you're not still, you can't still fall prey to to the active alcoholism, but it's like for this moment, you're recovered based on that spiritual condition. Every day we get a reprieve. And it doesn't say, oh, but maybe no, it just says you're recovered, and to live in that kind of certainty, it makes it a whole lot different than when you're living under fear. When you're living under faith that, yes, I'm recovered, it's a whole different story than when you're living like, I better do this or I'll relapse, or, oh, I gotta do this or I'll relapse. And then you're doing everything out of fear instead of faith. I just thought that was a great story.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
Anybody online? Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you both. I'm definitely the product of excellent sponsorship, and very, very early on, it wasn't the first night that I met my first sponsor, but it was in the second time we got together. He informed me about the difference between the fellowship and the program. And then when we got into the book, he pointed it out in the prefaces and in the forewords, where it clearly delineates the difference between the fellowship and the program. And it's not that one is better than the other. They're just two wildly different things. And I too mistakenly thought that the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous meant that I was working a program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I came to my own understanding that no, that was just the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. That was a very cool thing, but that wasn't necessarily the program. So thank you for that. Any other? So the only other thing I would throw out there for reference is talk to your sponsor. That's always a great reference point about sponsorship. So put them on the clock. All right. We'll move on here. Oh boy. Oops, sorry. So when we talk about what a sponsor is, there is a ton of text on this slide. I'm not going to read it to you. We'll leave it up so folks can sort of glance at it. But like I mentioned, we've got great literature. Thank you again, Jennifer, for putting that in the chat so folks have access to it. Our literature committee for decades now has done phenomenal work to just sort of capture our experience. So it just walks you through what it is according to Alcoholics Anonymous, which I hope we all understand means that will be a very broad, very inclusive, probably a little vague with some room for interpretation on some things, and and then some lines in some other places. So I thought we could walk through this. I'll hit on some things that I think are noteworthy. If folks have comments, this is a great time to come off of mute if you want to, or speak up in the room. And we'll just see what this sparks. When we get through this section of the pamphlet, I'll ask for folks to say, hey, what did you hear? What did you learn? How does this align with your experience? Yeah, so we'll do that. But if that comes in real time, that's also fantastic. So I think the first one, it's not surprising. These, I believe, are, I made the presentation a little while ago. I went in and touched it up earlier this week. But if I remember correctly, I did go sequential with the actual pamphlet. So if you want to follow along, you'll see that these are blatant copy and paste of the pamphlet. And it's not surprising to me that the first point is sponsor and sponsees meet as equals. And Steve just shared a great story with us. I'm not going to make this the Dan show. When I met with my sponsor the first time, he was a literal genius. That was obvious that he was very, very, very intelligent. I was as crazy or crazier than Steve was sharing, and he was, and my first sponsor was not. And so I didn't even remotely think that we were equal. I probably would have went along with him even if he had not treated me as equal. But that man never spoke to me or acted in a way that wasn't shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee. Like, I eventually was recovered enough that I could see him as an equal, but he always treated me that as an equal. And I think for a lot of obvious reasons, hopefully that's a key, that we're shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, and the only authority that we have is a higher power. So obviously that's a key tenet to what we're trying to do here. They say here that this sponsorship is a process, right? And there's directions in the book, but it's an individual basis, and about how we maintain and continue our sobriety. And I'm not suggesting that you can't do. In my time, I've been sober since 1994. I've heard of people going through the steps in groups and all sorts of stuff, way beyond my pay grade. I'm just pointing out here that the pamphlet does say individual basis. This is what it says. The sponsorship is our 12th step, as it says in that, but it is an ongoing responsibility, not only for us as members that are here, but also to be shared with the newcomer, that this is something that is suggested for to continue on. So the sponsor is a bridge. I've done a lot of, I'm sort of a creature of habit. And so I've been in treatment centers on Thursdays for most of my sobriety. And when I'm in a treatment center, I'm not necessarily trying to pick up sponsees, right? I mean, I certainly have gotten a lot of sponsees out of a treatment center, but as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous in a treatment center, what I'm really trying to do is just give them an attractive example of the fellowship of AA to get them into what I call the boat. Where they sit on the boat, not so much concerned about, but just get them onto the boat. And then something that I like to do with the men that I sponsor early on is I take them to a variety of meetings and try to introduce them to as many people as they can. Because when they come to the conclusion that I'm a tragically flawed alcoholic and they don't want to talk to me anymore, they'll know other sober members of AA. And I think that's a huge part of what we can do is and I think it also demystifies that somehow we're gurus or something like that. It points out here that the most important thing, and we don't use words like most important in our literature unless we really think it's most important, is the only thing that we need to have in common is alcoholism and recovery in AA. And there's traditions that support this too, so it's just reminding us that's what it is.
I have a question about
yes,
that, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe somebody has some
Yes.
experience
Yes,
with that. So one alcoholic working with another alcoholic versus one alcoholic working with a drug addict, or one alcoholic working with a whatever else. So I'm just sort of wondering if anybody has experience with that. Singleness of purpose or whatever, however you want to look at it.
And on any of these questions, I'll get my time on the mic. So when the questions come, I'm gonna look for you guys to answer first. Yeah, so this would be a great time if folks have comments on that.
No, but
Don't be bashful.
I'm Kristen. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Kristen.
Kristen?
I think I understand the question, and I'll just throw out that in my own experience, I never sponsor anybody, unless I have experience in the issues that they're having trouble with. In other words, alcoholism, of course. If drugs are a big part of somebody's story, I try to steer them towards someone who has experience in that specific area. I don't feel comfortable trying to guide somebody through a process that I myself didn't go through. If that addresses what you were talking about. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question, just to follow up part B of this question is, why is it important to identify? I mean, how many different 12-step programs are there where the first step is really the only difference? So I'm sort of wondering, why is it important, that identification of alcoholic to alcoholic? I mean, isn't the recovery process the same for everyone, regardless of addiction, when it comes to a 12-step process? And so I'm just, I mean, I have an opinion on it, but I would like to get other people's experience.
I'm Judy, alcoholic, and I have always heard that you can't give away what you don't have. But I don't know if that really applies here, because I'm in several other 12-step groups, and I gotta tell you, my first sponsor sponsored me so well in this program that I utilize a lot of that same sponsorship in my other programs. But I'm also, one of the people that suffer from those things too.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, that's a great question.
And other 12-step programs actually use the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous
Exactly.
to work the 12 steps.
And some don't.
Mm-hmm.
And
Some
don't.
take it
Sure,
to
sure.
their 12 by 12 or.
Yeah.
Morgan, alcohol.
Hold on one second, Morgan. I'm just gonna let Jennifer,
Oh, sorry.
she's being super polite and raised her hand. So I think, thank you, Jennifer, but just come off mute next time if you feel comfortable with it, but please, thank you.
Yeah, it's not that I don't feel comfortable, but I know it's a little tricky with the two different hybrid things. So Jennifer, alcoholic. So yeah, I definitely know my own experience was I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and I hadn't had a drink in a couple of years. So I didn't know I was an alcoholic, but I did. I'm grateful that I found out in my first meeting that it was revealed to me. So it seems like a step one thing. And I do, as a drug addict, as a person with many outside issues, I am a firm believer in both the singleness of purpose in Alcoholics Anonymous and this sort of open, openness, because if they had said you have to be an alcoholic to go into a meeting of AA, I wouldn't have come in. So I've talked to many people about sponsorship, and when somebody doesn't know they're an alcoholic and they're kind of upfront with that, it's more of a friendship kind of talking thing. That I'm not willing to quote unquote sponsor someone unless they're they're willing to do step one, I guess, in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that certainly doesn't mean that I wouldn't continue to fellowship with them, invite them to meetings, because I've and I'm sure you have, Laura, know many people who've come in and out of AA and never really did step one. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. And I do think it is important for me as a person who has drugs as part of my story that I share that in AA, because oftentimes there's other people in the meeting who are still smoking pot or doing whatever, and they will come and talk to me specifically about their experience because I've shared that with them. And I think that's how we help each other, is what is my actual experience in and out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So you might still be helping somebody, but for me, I wouldn't probably, I mean, I have not been in a situation where I would sponsor someone in Alcoholics Anonymous unless they are willing to talk about step one. So thanks.
Thank you. Morgan?
I'm still Morgan, still not alcoholic, also a drug addict. She made me think of something else, but so real quick, I had a friend who's in AA. She also was a drug addict, but predominantly alcoholic. She took her coworker that was a normie through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous because they were like, I want this relief. I want a first step. Like, I want to like look at this shit. And the lady had a fantastic experience. I don't know if that's against the traditions or what my point is with that, but I just thought it was interesting. So the cool thing about the first step is you're diagnosing yourself as an alcoholic. So if someone's like, I'm just a drug addict, like I'm cool with that. Like we're gonna look at this and see if you're a fucking alcoholic, and then you diagnose yourself. So like I think that's a non-issue. I can see how somebody that was only an alcoholic would be uncomfortable sponsoring somebody that their main issue was drugs, but they drank alcoholically, like, and that's fine for them. Like I walked into AA this time and I hadn't had a drink of alcohol in a couple of years. Like I had been smoking pot and dry and miserable or whatever you would call it. So it's kind of hard for me to relate. Like I don't have any recent like bad alcohol stories that I can really share. Like they're like way in my past, but I have had them. So.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I'll just share this just because my first sponsor made a significant deal about this because I introduced myself one time as an alcoholic and addict, and then we had a conversation. And I'm unaware of anywhere, at least in the big book, where it doesn't separate alcohol and drugs. It does not ever, a drug is a drug is a drug is not Alcoholics Anonymous. That's not, Silkworth says alcoholic and drug addiction, right? That's what he says. So my experience is for me, was I shared that I was an alcoholic addict because it wasn't enough in that moment. I was insecure and I wanted to have a harder edge or whatever it was. And I don't think that's relevant. But what was relevant is what my sponsor said to me afterwards, because we were in the third step at this point, and he said, "Have you figured out what you're dying of yet?" And if I gave you the setting, it was he was not a come across the table guy. I was like, whoa. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, have you figured out what you're dying of yet? And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, what was that back there? And I said, well, drugs is part of my story. And I apologize if this is a little crass, but this is what he said. He said, so's chronic masturbation, but you didn't feel compelled to tell us about that.
Wow.
And that called out my ego. And that's why I know I was just doing it because I didn't feel enough. It wasn't enough to be an alcoholic. And then what he said is, he said, Dan, the reason why we're doing this is because you identified with the phenomenon of craving, which is what makes you special. That's the only thing that makes you special. We could take 100 people and force them to drink alcoholically. They can be physically dependent on alcohol and they will not experience the phenomenon of craving. That's the difference. Drugs, they're addictive. Everyone gets addicted to them and everyone, for all practical purposes, uses them the same way. And that's what I was shown. And when I read it with a guy, I pointed out that that's what it says. And I won't go into the rest of it. There's other parts of the book that I think support that as well. So what he said to me was, he's like, we want to make sure that when somebody who's dying of this fatal progressive illness of alcoholism shows up at AA, that they can identify with that. And so that's why, even though I've done a lot of other things and have a lot of other outside issues, in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm only an alcoholic. If I'm talking to somebody one-on-one, I might be all sorts of other things, right? Including a jerk. But that's, that to me was how the singleness of purpose it had been explained to me, but it was how it landed, was how I learned it as an experience, right? You know, when I sort of that's when it all sort of connected. I was like, oh. So, but I would always encourage folks to follow the dictates of a higher power. You know, like that's a guiding principle in what we have here in AA. So awesome. Any other comments on that one?
I'm sorry, I'm Kristen, I'm an alcoholic.
Please.
And I hate for us to, I don't want to get us stuck on this topic, but it is really an interesting point. I appreciate everybody's comments, and I want to just elaborate a little bit on where I was headed with that. I think that I try to share recovery with anybody I meet, and you know, this world is a hurting place, and anybody who sees, I think, a recovering alcoholic walking around with a smile on their face and sort of the equanimity with which we can face problems. I love sharing about the program with people like that. What I was trying to say is, for example, with sponsorship, in addition to alcohol, drugs are part of my story. That wasn't my, you know, when they said drug of choice, alcohol was always my drug of choice. I did later work the steps on an eating disorder. And so that was what I was thinking when I said I try to work with women that identify with the same basic issues as me, those primary problems: eating disorder, alcohol. And I actually worked the steps on that. I had a sponsor with that. And so then I can share that experience with that person. So thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like we've had some folks join since we got started. So I would just let folks know that a couple things. One, and I think Zoom told you this when you logged on, but we are still recording. And we'll figure out at the end if we still want to keep the recording, but we're recording at this moment. And that this is a sponsorship workshop, but at its core, it's a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so if you are compelled to speak or want to share, we would encourage you to either speak up in the room or come off mute and please share so our group conscious can be fully formed. All right, moving on.
What was Lara's?
What?
What was Lara's answer?
Mm.
You said you had an answer.
I'm sorry, I'm eating apple.
Sorry. I'm curious. I'll get you at the break.
Dan,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, Steve.
so I got a story about all this.
Yes, please.
When I was about 5 years sober, or a couple years into sponsorship, I was, well, first of all, the way I was sponsored, so that's my own experience, is I was never, ever one time told to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
It was always presented to me that recovery from alcoholism is an invitation. And I had heard stories about, well, my sponsor makes me do this and my sponsor makes me do that. And I don't have experience with it because of how I was sponsored. It's just all an invitation. Let's see what they did in the book and see what the results were, and then do it or don't do it. But back to the point of the different 12-step programs, I was invited to attend a workshop which went on for quite a while, and it was founded on a line in our big book on towards the bottom of page 42, where the founders wrote this sentence. They said, "We discovered we could solve all our problems with spiritual principles." And based on that, so what did they say? What are they telling us? They made a discovery that all their problems could be solved by spiritual principles. So what if you had a problem with drugs? What if you had a problem with eating? What if you had emotional problems? What if you had a problem with marijuana? We had this workshop where every one of those areas of problems were present. And lest there be any confusion, which there wasn't, nobody called it a AA meeting, we were looking at the big book based on that sentence. Could spiritual principles solve problems with people that they have other than alcoholism? And what we found out is absolutely. And using, as most of these other areas have 12-step programs, whether it's eating or drugs or whatever, the people that attended that got an understanding of how our founders navigated their life after they stopped drinking. And as far as I know, and still in touch with some of these people all these years later, it worked for them too. And they were able to go back to their own people, if you want to say it like that, and have something to share. And so, of course, with all the different 12-step programs, obviously, other afflictions have found the 12 steps helpful. But yet at its core, there is also AA. And people a lot smarter than me have found through trial and error that, I don't want to use the word pure, but our problem is best solved with other people that had gone through the same problem. So I think it can be very, very helpful going through the steps if your problem isn't alcoholism, but it also doesn't have to be called AA.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to share a massive opinion here. I just got to share it. I think it's very interesting that we didn't, I'm unaware of any intentional act, but when we failed to copyright, we failed to update the copyright of the first edition, it became public domain. And my opinion is the boss was like, this is too good for you guys to keep to yourself, but through your singleness of purpose, you can have it, but it can be spread. But, it was actually one of the goals. The third goal of the big book is, besides, we think our way of living has advantages for all, right?
Can I say something about that? AA didn't fail to renew the copyright. They deliberately didn't.
Okay, well, that makes a lot more sense to me, because we don't want to own assets or anything. So I think that's a great example of literally what I was trying to say is, for me to sponsor, and I only sponsor men at this point, but it's never been indicated to sponsor a woman, but for me to sponsor someone in Alcoholics Anonymous, they have to identify as an alcoholic. They can identify with a gazillion other things as well, but if they don't identify with that, I just say, look, I can't help you as a member of AA, because what my sponsor had is, I knew that he knew how I felt. Okay. So, but no question that the steps are helpful for all the great reasons that were shared. And I think if folks are okay with it, I'm going to allow us to rabbit hole. If we rabbit hole, and just trust that that's what the group conscience needs to be. But if folks want to move along, then you can also tell us, Dan, don't rabbit hole. It's our meeting. All right. So the whole program, not just the individual sponsors, that's what we want to pass on. And then they do stress here that many feel that it's good to only have one sponsor. And my personal experience with that makes a lot of sense to me. If I had multiple sponsors, I think I would show up as version 1 to one and version 2 to the other, and then I'd be living multiple lives again. So yeah, so it's not about the sponsor, but it is about having one. Obviously, you should feel comfortable with the sponsor. Yeah, that needs to, it's probably a little uncomfortable. I think a little uncomfortable. If it was certainly a little uncomfortable for me when I was the newcomer with my sponsor, because he had a grasp of reality and I didn't. That was uncomfortable. But the idea would be is that it should be a comfortable situation, and it should be helpful. even though it was incredibly uncomfortable, I never felt like it wasn't helpful. And it wasn't uncomfortable by anything that he was doing. I was just uncomfortable because I was sober. A reminder on the second one is that it may be that the newcomer has a lot of experience that we don't have any opinions about. But we have our AA principles in everyday application. I don't think it's surprising in this room, but it does point out that most AAs feel that sponsorship is a vital part of their ongoing growth, and including folks that have long-term sobriety. So any thoughts on those three? All right. So that is what a sponsor is, and a little bit of why we have a sponsor, since we sort of check the temperature. So I think it's great that we had folks chime in as we went. So anything else, anything that popped up in the conversation, and then just a chance to sort of, how does this align or not align with your experience so far?
So my name's Lara, I'm an alcoholic.
Lara?
When I first got sober, I was told to get a sponsor. And it took me about 6 months to get a sponsor after I had sort of worked up to step 4, actually kind of worked myself up to step 4, which, you know, for everything it was. I think I was using some sort of Hazelden guide or something like that. And so I informed my sponsor that I would be letting her know when I needed to do the 5th step. And so yeah, that's exactly what she did. And she says, okay. And so, and then we proceeded to work the steps again after that, using some like Joe and Charlie Big Book tapes, which were great, because I had, you know, up to that point, the Big Book, you know, put me to sleep. Like I sobered up when I was very young, and not that that matters necessarily, because I think it can put older people to sleep too, if they aren't properly aware, you know, armed with the facts that are in that book. And so, but the Joe and Charlie Big Book tapes really were helpful. But that's how my first sponsor knew how to sponsor. And it shined some light on the book using those tapes that I didn't have before. It wasn't until I was about 4.5 years sober, and I was still very, you know, granted, I got, you know, I was only like 21 or 22 with 4 years of sobriety, and I'm still pretty a prey to misery and depression, and unable to really be of use to my fellows. And you know, I could always hold a job, so that wasn't necessarily an issue, but I just wasn't, I was just things were very dramatic, and I was very unhappy in my sobriety. Much like Stephen's example of, like, you know, somebody, but it just so happened that I married somebody who happened to go to a Big Book workshop, and he was coming home with all this radical information, like he was gonna drink again and all this stuff. I was like, what are you talking about, you know? And he was young in sobriety. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I got introduced to a process, you know, a Big Book workshop process that took me through the book in a way that I now take individuals through, and that's how I sponsor people, because it showed me, you know, sentence by sentence, promise by promise, through the Big Book, what I would like to think the original intention of the message of Alcoholics Anonymous is. And so that being said, I just don't think that everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous who's sober a while and has worked the steps really, I mean, everybody, you know, there's lots of different ways to work the steps, I guess, right? As we, you know, they, you know, Hazelden has this, and, you know, whatever. I mean, there's lots of different things out there that can guide you. A woman's way through the steps, you know, just all kinds of variety of things, and none of them are good or bad. They just are. I like the simplicity of the message in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I think it doesn't do Alcoholics Anonymous any favors to bring in outside material. I think that that's just my experience with that. I might be a little closed-minded about it, but it just seems to work. It seems to be very effective. So when people ask me, you know, have you read this book or that book, that isn't, you know, I guess I'm getting Bleeding Deacon here or something, but I just think that the book of Alcoholics Anonymous has enough information in it to work the steps and have a psychic change that can help you recover from alcoholism. I don't think it needs to get much more complicated than that. So that's my experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on what's a sponsor? And obviously, if something fires in 3 minutes, you can certainly bring it back up. But anything before we move on?
I'm Kristen. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Kristen.
And I'll throw in just a couple thoughts. What Laura was saying is interesting. There's so many different ways that you can do the steps, and I think I've done them in a variety of ways with a number of different sponsors. I've moved quite a bit in sobriety, so I've had different sponsors in different areas. But I think for me, you know, I settled on a way through the steps that worked for me, and it just so happened to be very much along the lines of what Laura was talking about, which is just straight out of the big book, and, you know, do the columns and do the fourth and fifth step in that way, and, you know, do the sixth step immediately after, and that's what worked for me. And so then that's how I pass it down to the women that I work with. But I have to say that all of the ways that I've been through the steps with a sponsor, and all of the different personalities of sponsors that I've had over the years have helped me. And I think that it gets down to the very bottom of the issue, which is when I came in here, I wanted nothing more than to be able to do this thing by myself. I just didn't want to have to bring other people into it. I wanted to be able to fix myself, go through the steps myself. And, you know, I felt that I could do that because I could read them and understand them. And, you know, but that's really different than sharing with another person. I remember we were, to get out of treatment, we had to have a sponsor. You know, now you could just put a name down and whatever. But I was scared of losing my life, so I did find a sponsor. And it was the most terrifying thing in my life that I ever did, was to ask this woman if she would help me and take me through the steps. And I think that, you know, they were onto something there, that, you know, we need to start letting people in a little bit to help us get over this, this deadly disease. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Jennifer, alcoholic.
Hey, Jennifer.
I was just looking through this. So my experience with this pamphlet is kind of funny that my current sponsor, who's my second sponsor, asked me to chair a meeting on sponsorship. She was the secretary. And I thought I was doing public information at the time. So I was like, there's a pamphlet on that. I'm going to bring the pamphlet and read from the pamphlet. And I thought I was a big deal, because I was like, have you read this pamphlet? And then I pulled the pamphlet out and started reading it. And I was like, oh, I've never read this pamphlet. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm doing it wrong. Like, I'm a terrible sponsor. Like, I'm doing it wrong. Because right away it said, don't take your sponsee's inventory unless asked or something. Oh my God, I'm the worst. So, but on page 16, kind of what people were talking about, their experience, and here it says, what is your experience? On page 16, it's talking about, you know, how can a sponsor explain the AA program? And I was like, oh, nearly all members who work with newcomers look upon the AA program in terms of their own experience. They tell the new person that no one speaks for AA, and that every member is perfectly free to arrive at an individual understanding of the program. And I think that's really good for me to read again. You know, some sponsors talk in a more spiritual way but but thinking I'm only able to bring to it through, it's all filtered through my experience. We can all read the same book and have different interpretations of it. In the book, it says we only know a little, it encourages you to like seek outside help with, doctors, clergy, religion, whatever, like seek and seek and seek, which I think is, to me, that's the answer. The answer is in the big book. All the answers are in there. And it says there's a lot of help out there. Talk to other people, get help. So I'm so grateful for that. And that reminder in the sponsorship thing, which again, if I try to sponsor just on my own without any direction from a sponsor and other members of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to do it my way. And honestly think that my way is the only way because it's the way I did it. Because it has helped. It saved my life. And I didn't like my first sponsor. She came up to me. She approached me. I didn't choose her. So I only know that experience. I know having a sponsor that I didn't like worked for me. She wasn't my friend. She was kind of a bitch. And she did a really good job. And I rolled my eyes the whole time. So yes, I think it's really important that for me to remember that my experience is really the only experience I know, and that I don't speak for Alcoholics Anonymous. And learning that in service has been very humbling and it translates into sponsorship. I'm not the boss. I don't put me on a pedestal. I don't know everything, but I'm going to do for you what was done for me. And you might roll your eyes at me because I totally did that. So yeah, I'm definitely grateful for this conversation because I still think I'm a terrible sponsor sometimes. And I need reminders, and I need you guys to share your experience with me because we all have different experiences with this. So thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Judy,
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I suffered from good sponsorship is how I put it. And my sponsor was not, she was very logical. In fact, she was an atheist. It cracked me up because I was not. And she taught me more about spirituality. I thought I just knew so much. And she looked at me once like, oh, we don't have to read We Agnostics. I'm not, I'm good. Me and God are like this. And she looked at me and she goes, why haven't you stopped drinking? And I went, oh, perhaps it was a one-sided relationship. But she took me through the book and she took me to page, I think it's 18. And she said, this is the definition of a sponsor. That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has an attitude, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful. There are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found more effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. And so that gave me kind of a definition. And then even though the word sponsor isn't mentioned in the big book, it's mentioned, I think it's 7 times in the 12 by 12. And so when Bill wrote that, 13 years after the big book came out, because he wanted to kind of flesh out and put in plainer language the steps. So yeah, it's really cool to read that too, what parts in the 12 by 12 define a sponsor. So
Fantastic. Great stuff. All right. So we're not going to take a break, but we could. I mean, do we want to? We're almost there. Yeah. I left it in there just in case. It was more a reminder to give folks a chance to breathe if we needed to. But so now comes the fun part. Potentially. How do I sponsor? How do I do it? And of course, how do I do it perfectly? Right. So yeah, not going to happen. So I think Judy gave us an excellent transition there with what she read there. Most effective or more effective, right? So I think what I have seen in my time in Alcoholics Anonymous is men and women who are doing the best they can to follow the dictates of a higher power frequently show up a little different for different people that they sponsor. And yeah, but when in doubt, the principles that we're talking about here will be most effective. But I would encourage you that's what we found to be most effective, that's consistent with our principles, but we do have this guiding principle of following the dictates of a higher power. And it would just seem to me that an infinite loving God could potentially decide to bend the rules occasionally, right? So I think, I don't know that there's a perfect way to do this, but we'll find out what some of the guiding principles are here. So obviously everything we've already covered in the first section is a huge part of what it is, because there's two sides to all that. I think anyone that has sponsored, I think I would just assume if you've ever sponsored even a person for a short period of time, I don't know how you couldn't have the experience that I've had, which is like, oh my gosh, I'm getting more out of this than they are. Right? So I tell the guys I sponsor, I'm like, and I refer to my higher power as the boss, because it doesn't freak people out no matter where I'm at when they hear the boss, right? So it's like sometimes the boss just goes 2 for 1. You know, that's how this works. It's just 2 for 1. You're not getting cheated, but I might get more out of it than you. Like, that's okay, right? That's just how it works. So, but that's been my experience, and I think it's a great reminder that I'm strengthening my sobriety. That's what I can be fairly certain of. I may or may not being helpful to the other person. I'm certainly not getting sober. There is no superior class or caste of sponsors. So I think this is key. Any member can help the newcomer learn to cope with living without resorting to alcohol in any form. Any member. It doesn't say any member that's worked the steps, or any member that's worked the steps in a certain way, or any member that, you know, jumps on 1 foot. It says any member. I think that's really important for me to remember for sure. I apologize. I think there's just a little glitch in that slide there. We're carrying the message of AA. The message of AA has been shared by many folks already. I can share my experience, but the message is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, and those are 2 different things. There might be a lot of overlap, but those are 2 different things. So it does say here that members who have actually worked the steps are often in the best position to share experience, strength, and hope. And one thing that I've said to newcomers to try to be as attractive as possible around this is to say, look, I've been around, I've been fortunate that I've been around for a while. And I will tell you, there are people that have what I call sort of lightning bolt sobriety. You'll talk to them and they're happy, like it's real, but they don't have a way to pass it on. I have a very garden variety textbook experience with getting sober, but it is, you know, that's, you'll see different things because my experience has been having attempted to do this and to continue to talk to my sponsor about it is I don't think when I'm talking to a newcomer, it is not, I've not had clean reflection in my constructive review that being super preachy about having to work the steps or any of that stuff that I may or may not have opinions about isn't terribly effective in the experience, strength, and hope side. That there's a way to do that with attractive, and that's why for myself, I pointed out any member can be a sponsor, and there's my experience and there's a message of AA, right? So the most successful sponsors seem to be men and women who have been in the AA long enough to have good understanding of the AA program outlined in the 12 steps. Now, they may or may not have done it, but they can speak to it. And I'm frequently surprised by people very new in recovery who at least can verbalize understanding. And then I've also met plenty of people that have been around for quite some time who there seem to be shocked that there's 12 steps, right? Like, so I don't, this is a great reminder that it just says long enough. And that can be actually a quite short period of time for some, and it might need to be a very long time for others. But it does seem to imply here that it is a program outlined in the 12 steps. Many of us think to seek advice from our own sponsors, right? And I think that's very, very, very polite way of saying, if you're going to sponsor, you might want to have a sponsor. Good practice there. I like to think about it as the links in the chain, right? I'm just a link in the chain. So it doesn't say we have to, but they think it's wise. Many think wise. Yeah. Sponsors should have capacity for understanding patients' willingness to devote time and effort to new members. I think if you don't have it, you might learn it by sponsoring people. It certainly is a great place. Whatever level of that I have in my life, I think I owe to Alcoholics Anonymous and sponsorship for sure. Yeah, sponsorship is grossly inconvenient. Like I can go be service to the rest of the boss's kids, and they'll think I'm wonderful and give me awards. You sponsor an AA, it can be a little inconvenient, right? And I think that's to my benefit for sure. We talked about this one before, but a sponsor encourages and introduces the newcomer to other members and encourages viewpoints and different interpretations.
Okay, so time for another story.
Yeah, please.
So,
and just a reminder, folks, I warned you that I would talk, but please chime in. So yes, thank you, Steve.
I found great help in the recovery process by understanding what some words meant. And there's a word that's used throughout the book, sober and sobriety. And it has more than one definition. When I came into AA, sobriety or being sober meant not drinking. And it's a definition that's, you can Google it. And of course I went to First Step meetings, and the focus and everything was just don't drink. Then it turned into, that's the most important thing in my life. Then that turned into, that's the most important thing in AA, which is an error in Alcoholics Anonymous. Judy quoted from page 18 about how it used to work. A person was approached by a man who had recovered. On page 19, they tell us that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. Much more important. They don't say more important, they say much more important. Basically, is how we live our life.
Yeah, the demonstration. Yeah.
And so I found there's also a definition for sobriety or of being sober that means of sound mind, correct thinking. And people that are of sound mind and think correctly, they're happy people. And so I could go on that first definition, which was very important at the time. It's brand new. I'm sober, I'm not drinking. But if somebody said, are you thinking correctly? Does your life reflect a life of correct thinking? I'm completely insane.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was introduced to that, and it made sense to me, but I would hear old timers just like with the amounts of time in AA that were incomprehensible to me, like 3 years or 10 years, 20 years. And they'd say, as long as I don't drink today, that's the most important thing, as long as I don't drink. And that message had no depth and weight for me because I already wasn't drinking. In fact, I remember one time my sponsor saying, Steve, did you have a drink in the last 24 hours? And I was offended, of course not. Why do you say that? And he said, do you know what that means? And I'm saying, what? And he said, no one in the whole world in Alcoholics Anonymous has not drank any better than you. Yeah. And I'm going like, oh, okay. And he said, let's talk about being happy. And so I got to see that I wanted sobriety. I wanted peace of mind. I wanted the crazy life I was living to end, and I couldn't do it. And like I said earlier, that's when I thought I needed a sponsor. And when he showed me things in the big book, like it's like not drinking, elimination of drinking, that's good. They don't say it's bad at all. They just say there's much more than that. And that was a message I hadn't heard, or it had been said 1,000 times, but I didn't hear it. And so my experience was like you read, Judy. I had a person approach me, and in my life for a long time now, I seem to pair up with people that have been in AA for a while, however you want to define that, 3 years or 30 years, but they're not happy and they can't figure it out because they're doing things right. And man, do I have that experience. And so, like you said, Dan, it just, there's a commonality, there's a shared experience that can be shared, if I'm willing to do it. And like you and everybody else I've ever heard for all the years in AA, in a sponsorship relationship, you grow, you heal, whichever side of the fence you're on. So it's a good deal. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Awesome. All right. Clicking along here. So it does say that the sponsor helps the newcomer get sober and stay sober through the AA program. And I don't want to get too preachy here while we're trying not to be preachy, but I at a different time and place, if you're interested, we can offline it or we can hang around a little bit afterwards. I think it's pretty clear in the big book that the program is the 12 steps. That's what it is. It's not the meetings, not any of that other stuff. So this does seem to imply that a sponsor shares the 12 steps in some form or fashion with the newcomer. Shows by present example. There's a demonstration there. Steve just reminded us of page 19 about it's just the beginning, a much larger demonstration in all our lives must be made, right? So it's just telling us that again. So suggest keeping an open mind about if the newcomer isn't sure at first whether he or she is an alcoholic. Something that my first sponsor said to me, I mean, I was just waffling because I was just terrified in general. And something that he said to me that was very powerful was, he's like, you may or may not ever be here again where you're sober and willing. And that hit me, like that hit me. And I had enough experience at that point that I could get some sense of sober and willing was not necessarily always the condition. This is how do I sponsor that sees that the newcomer is aware of the AA literature. So, if I'm going to be a sponsor, am I letting them know about all of the incredible pieces of literature that we have and all that? And then ultimately, am I or is the sponsor available? Okay. Moving on. This starts to get a little bit more explicit as we go about the 12 steps. So I think there's room just to try to be fair about what the thing does or doesn't say. I think the pamphlet gives room for sponsorship to be sort of whatever an individual AA member of AA wants to make being a sponsor in their experience, but they sure seem to keep intimating at the 12 steps being a big part of what we're talking about. So I've just thrown that out there. Encourages or urges the newcomer to join in group activities as soon as possible. Impresses upon the newcomer the importance of our traditions. Emphasizes the relevance of the spiritual value of anonymity. I think there's obviously a lot here. I think it was always obviously important because they wouldn't have made a tradition about it if it wasn't important. With social media, it just seems like we all have a lot more access to public than we did maybe say 35 years ago or something. So, you know, just making sure that we're aware of, they've only clicked on a couple of them now, but at least the first 24 of the 36 principles that we have of Alcoholics Anonymous. 12 steps and 12 traditions, that is. Here's where I would say it starts to throw out maybe the next 12 set of principles, the 12 concepts. So it tries to give the newcomer some picture of the scope of AA. When I first came into, it was actually technically in a different building, but when I first came down to intergroup, AA was big because I had read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. And so like it was a little bigger, but it somehow got bigger when I got into an intergroup office. And then when I went to a quarterly, it got bigger because it just wasn't my little church basement that I was going to. So I think it's reminding us here that, you know, we want to show them the scope or the person the scope. And then the 3 legacies, hey, what do you know? The 3 legacies of service. I've had a lot of experience of being, I think, at least I hope, helpful reminding folks or informing folks about Al-Anon and Alateen, all the things that are available for their families. I have a couple of experiences actually where the men didn't stay sober, but their family members stayed in Al-Anon. And that's heartbreaking on one level, but it was an interesting turn of events.
So,
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
so
Please.
all these suggestions that we're looking at now, the assumption in them is you already have a sponsee.
Yes.
So what's a person do to get a sponsee? Just, you know, whatever reason, I feel a calling, I want a sponsee.
Yeah.
How do you get one? And I have, it's not my trick,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's one that I've used a lot of times. And that's when approaching another alcoholic that, in my opinion, is really suffering from the disease of untreated alcoholism, I ask for help.
Mhm.
And it can be asked in a way, hey, I got this problem of resentments, because that's usually the most common
Mhm.
bond. And I've gone through the steps before and it solved them. And I need to go through them again, but will you go through them with me? And it's a way of approach that I've had tremendous success with, because you're asking for help. And sure. And so we start, you know, at the beginning of the book, and the process of recovery takes its course.
Mhm.
And the word sponsor and sponsee is never even brought up, but the dynamic of it
Mhm.
does. But it gets a person a sponsee.
Mhm. That's great. So I'll share one. And well, before I share one, does anyone else have any other? And I'm just going to call it habits, or I apologize. This probably isn't the right word. I don't have a better word, but you sort of plant it in my head. Does anyone else have any other tricks or tactics that they use that they have found that's been helpful? Judy.
That's it. Just
Yeah.
raise my hand to me.
Yeah. Awesome.
Jennifer has.
When they ask
Jennifer.
Yeah, this is not my trick, but even now I was like, I haven't used this in a while, but I am super impressed by my first sponsor who approached me when I said something out loud in a meet. It was like my 6th meeting, and I really didn't want to do this, and said it out loud, sort of. I was like, I might be, maybe, possibly, you know, like looking for a sponsor. And I'm going to talk to her because I didn't know who the hell she was, and I didn't know what she had or if I wanted it. And she came up to me after the meeting and said, if you need someone to take you through the book, I'm available. And that's what she said. And I really didn't know what she was talking about. So I did meet with her for coffee a couple times. And at the end of that second meeting, I actually said, does this mean you're my sponsor? And she did not approach it in that way at all. And I found out much later that I was her first sponsee, because I knew I really did not, and I'd read the book ish. And I said, I don't, want to do this, but people kept saying, get a sponsor, do the steps, get a sponsor, do the steps. And I was like, how does it work though? And so her approaching me in that way, and I'm not sure if that's what her sponsor did for her, but I look back and I'm like, damn, that was good. Like Steve just said, or whatever, the tricking somebody. And I was like, wow, that was smooth. Like,
choice of words.
did she know that if she said sponsor that I was going to like run away from her? Cause I probably would, that she just tricked me into it. But but yeah, so that's a strategy, because I think, the idea of, I was like, what book? Like, I don't know what book you're talking about. And it was super helpful. So, yeah.
Awesome. So I don't know where I got this from. I don't know if my first sponsor told it to me or the boss just put it in my mouth when I've sponsored a lot of guys. And so I give them the directions when we get here. I said, so now here's your job. When you're in an AA meeting, whether it's our home group or any AA meeting, you need to listen for the sickest person in the room, preferably a male. And there's always going to be one. Like, there's always there will be a sickest person. They could be, it might be you, right? But and after the meeting, you're supposed to go up to them. If you don't already know them, introduce yourself and say, I really like what you had to share. And then tell them what you identified with as their sickness. Don't tell them that you thought they were the sickest person in the room and your sponsor told them that that's what this is how you could carry the message. But that has been wildly effective. I don't know how many, probably used it a few hundred times at a minimum, and it's always real. Like I don't know what the guys that sponsor feel about it. They don't complain about it or whatever, but that cracks the ice. And then I speak to what I heard them say, and then tell me more about that, and then you're in a conversation. So that's at least a way to get into conversation with somebody. I heard Steve's been here before, and I know him a little bit. I had heard his approach before. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh my God, that is the best thing I've ever heard. I still love that approach. It's the same thing, right? It's meeting them where they are. And I think we've talked about that we're equals. We're talking about that. So yeah, getting into conversation with them is probably the key. So fantastic. I don't know might be the three most powerful words I have and have learned in sobriety. And as a sponsor, I'm quick to admit that. Hopefully, they're suggesting I should be. Sponsor encourages the newcomer to work with other alcoholics. It does not say after they finish the steps. I was told right away that I now had a message to share, and that I should share my message of hope with, not only when I spoke in meetings, but I should start talking to newcomers as well. And I didn't have to worry about if I was going to be their sponsor or not, right? Like I should just get in that habit. Never tries to impose personal views on the newcomer. This one was brought up before. Yeah, never takes the newcomer's inventory except when asked. Okay. I understand why we don't want to do that. As a human, I have a very difficult time doing that. I don't share their inventory with them, but I do take it probably more than never. That's for sure. Does not pretend to know all the answers and does not keep a pretense of being right all the time. Some of my most favorite moments of working with sponsees is when I'm like, I don't know, I think I should call my sponsor. Like, let's run it up the food chain. I guess the boss wants to go 3 for 1 on this one, right? Like, and he'll probably get more out of it than all of us, right? So I think that, or I try as much as I can to demystify the guru or whatever, because there's times when I'm approached by somebody, or when folks reach out to you, there can be a tendency that they're attracted to you for whatever that is. And so I try to level set that as much as I possibly can. reminding us of our tradition here that we don't offer professional services. Yeah.
So also that never takes a newcomer's inventory unless asked. What does that look like in real life? Meeting with somebody. I suppose one way of looking at it, and I've been asked 1,000 different things like, my boss is a cheapskate, so I've been stealing. You know, what should I do? I file incorrect income taxes, but the government's, they waste my money. Just ask my wife, I think my wife's cheating on me or whatever the situation is. So you're asked a legitimate question. And I found it helpful, and people go in different directions. But when we say, well, let's see how the people that wrote the book solve that type of problem. And we can look into it. And most of the time, like especially if it has to do with money, they're not interested at that time they ask the question in doing what the founders did. But you've put it, I mean, you've shown them where it is. Here's what they did, and here's their result. And well, I'm not going to do that. I'm kidding. So that's a way of, and that's it. Hey, I'm not answering any of those type of questions because I think whatever the question is can be found at least in content in the book.
Yeah, no, I'll it seems appropriate to also add this. So, so I've heard, I've had 2 sponsors in my sobriety, and I've given my sponsors as many excuses as I could come up with, but I didn't really ever use the excuse of why I couldn't sponsor or why it wasn't available or anything like that. But I've heard a lot of them. And then I've also heard what I think is genuine concern from men that I sponsor about, well, I'm 24 and this person's 40, or this guy's 42 and he has kids, and like, I don't know any of that. And I just said, whoa, man, slow your roll, personality, principles before personalities. And what we have is a set of principles that are really a relationship for ourselves, and then a relationship with our higher power, and then ultimately a relationship with the rest of the boss's kids. So the circumstances are only relevant to the guy you're sponsoring. They're not relevant to the principles at all. Like, a relationship is a relationship, whether it's a spouse, a child, a coworker, like whatever. And I can see why the person that wants to be sponsored, the sponsee, for lack of a better word, like they want someone that looks like them or is ahead of them or something like that. But I would just remind folks that, and this is what I heard Steve very eloquently say, is I don't have to have that experience to be able to be helpful as a sponsor, because the principles that we have will apply to the circumstances that they are completely wrapped around their axle on, but the guiding principles will help us. All right. Let's see. Sponsors will want to explain AA in a manner that finds most natural and most likely to be clear to the newcomer. So again, we want to meet them where they're at. Nearly all members who work with newcomers look upon AA program in terms of their own experience. And they're reminding us again that, as was read earlier by Jennifer, I think, read it, that we don't get to speak, excuse me. It encourages us not to speak for AA as a whole, that no one really gets to, but we can certainly talk about our experience. They bring up hospitalizations. It was brought up by folks already that we want to, it tells us in the book, and we certainly want to encourage people to seek outside help if that's what they need to do. And I think this is reminding us that there is a a clear separation between hospitalization or professional services and what we do as a sponsor. So, the sponsor would be encouraged to tell the sponsee to listen, listen to the medical or the mental health professional, whatever the outside person is the expert in what that is. And they're talking specifically around hospitalization. I think when we think about it today, there's a lot of other things other than just straight hospitalization there. The thing that I will throw out there is I like to remind the guys that I'm sponsoring, it's like, let's be honest with this person though. So they can actually be helpful. If you go lie to them, then they can't really, you're not really following the directions of a medical professional. And then here, as it also relates to alcohol withdrawal and getting off of the physical dependence of alcohol, that can be fatal. And so we don't ever want to step in where medical folks should be included. Jennifer, you had your hands raised.
Yeah, I would think this was coming up through stuff we were talking about earlier, but I'm super grateful for my sponsor that I currently have, but for other people that sometimes do discuss the mental health stuff. Because in the book, one of the things that I kept hearing when I was new about the mental illness, there are those two who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. And I know that jumped out at me when I was new. And I had a lot of shame myself around mental illness because it's in my family. And I felt I was suffering from some mental illness beyond just alcoholism. And I am so grateful for the things in the book that sort of speak to that. And I think as a sponsor, and there's another pamphlet about mental illness or mental health stuff in AA, the idea that, again, like someone was talking about eating disorder stuff, I've had a sponsee with really disordered eating who went to treatment for it sober. And to have that as part of the sharing between sponsor-sponsee on a level playing field is super important. And then whenever it drops in that like seeking professional help, the idea that, and again, my sponsor said this to me one time when I was having some mental health stuff was coming up, and she was giving me encouragement to go talk to somebody in therapy. And she said this, and I remember my reaction was like, can you say that in AA? She said, the 12 steps can't fix everything. And I'm just so grateful that she said that, because that didn't make me not want to go to AA. It made me feel like, oh, like AA is Alcoholics Anonymous. You can do both. You can have this and recover. And I was like, what? It says that, it says that in the book. So again, this idea of us talking about these things kind of openly, especially some things are one-on-one because they are personal or there's a lot of shame around them with a sponsor who is open to hearing that stuff is, I think, really important.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I don't know if I felt like we covered this one once before, but I guess I put it in twice. I felt pretty strongly about it that they know about that the rest of the Al-Anon and Alateen. So we'll mention it twice since I put it in there twice. Then this last one here might spark up some comments. It's just saying that if we want the sponsor who lends money to a newcomer does so at the risk and may even be slowing down the new person's progress towards sobriety. The newcomer returns to AA for money is coming from the wrong place, the wrong thing. AA is something far more important to offer sobriety. So, the book talks about when and how to give, right? And encourages us to follow the dictates of a higher power. My personal experience just very quickly on this is that it's been very rare that I give anything other than like, let's read the book to guys I sponsor. And then I've been far more helpful to other people in AA that I didn't have a sponsor relationship with. It was just interesting how that's turned out. But yeah, that's yeah. Any questions on that one or comments?
That reminds me of don't go to a hardware store if you need a bra.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. I don't know that I'll repeat that one, but I'm thinking a lot. Yeah. It sounds much better when you say it than when I say it, I think. That was good. All right. This one I think is really, 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 really important. We've had some excellent conversations around this in previous workshops. And I don't even know, I'll just share my opinion about this one. It says, when first asked the sponsor will have met with the newcomer and will have discussed their commitments and agreed upon expectations early in the relationship. I think doing that might even be more important than what you specifically agree to. But having that shared expectation about what the commitment is and what the expectations are, just having it, I think, might be more important than the content of what you decide on. And not to make light of what that is, but that was one of the things that was shared with me very early in my relationship with my first sponsor. We literally call it in our lineage, we call it the first talk, where we actually go over, at the appropriate time and place. If it gets to that place, we talk about how this is a different relationship than if we're just buds in AA. Any questions or comments on that?
My name's Laura. I just, one sponsor I had, asked me that if I was willing to go to any lengths to, stay sober. And when I first got this sponsor, I was actually already like 16 years sober at the time. My first and second sponsor didn't ever ask me that question necessarily, put it in those words. And then I of course said yes, because I had reached sort of a point where, again, I was sort of emotionally raw and needed a new experience. And so I was going to them for a new experience. And then I said yes, and then she said, and when we're done, are you willing to carry this message to still more alcoholics who suffer? And of course I said yes. So I knew from the very beginning that those were going to be her requirements to sponsor me and take me through the 12 steps. So that's just one experience I had with asking somebody to be my sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
I had that same experience. My sponsor had me write in the beginning of my big book, first the set-aside prayer, and then the 3 questions you ask anybody that wants to be a sponsee. Are you ready to stop drinking? Will you go to any lengths so you can remind them later when they don't do their, we ask them, you said you were going to go to any lengths. And then the third one was, will you carry the message? Mm-hmm. And she also said to pray for a week after someone asked me to be their sponsor, mm-hmm. Kind of run it through the higher power. And then also I always talk to my sponsor too before I mm-hmm. accept a sponsee.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is all fantastic. I have nothing to add on the side from the sponsor. I think it's been covered great. The thing that I would just remind all of us is the reason why I think it's so important that we have why I think having a shared one is more important than the particulars is the person asking or the sponsee, we don't have any idea what they think if we don't. They could think we're a therapist. They could think that we're a limo driver. They could think all of that if we don't actually have a conversation to figure out what our commitments and what our agreed upon expectations are. It's very reasonable. If you've been to 4A meetings, almost any conclusion is possible in Alcoholics Anonymous, as far as I'm concerned. So I think it's just, yeah, I think, especially if they're new, if they haven't, even if they've been around for a while, but it's certainly if they're new, I sort of give them the free rein that they could literally think anything at that point. You know, they've heard whatever they've heard. They've seen some stuff on movie or what, you know, I mean, who knows what they think a sponsor is. So, yeah, I think it's just a great way to start that relationship.
My sponsor also said, make sure that first time you meet, you listen and let them do most of the talking before you ever ask those 3 questions.
Sure.
You know, just really listen, because they may disclose to you what you're not able to. You know, they can tell you a lot about themselves.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Huge point here. Most good sponsors emphasize that people who have slipped continue to be welcome in AA. Yeah, no, every time someone comes back, I have sort of the same sort of split second experience of I'm amazed that they came back, because I just think with my ego, I don't count on that I would come back. And then I'm always also amazed that everyone just, and I am, you know, I embrace it too, that we're so stone cold crazy that we think we can't come back, even though, and I'm sure it's happened and it's unfortunate, but my overwhelming experience with it is not only is that they are continuing to be welcome, that we don't, we're not keeping score. I mean, we do keep day counts for ourselves, but we're not keeping score on other people about how well they are or aren't doing. It's just amazing.
My name is Laura, I'm an alcoholic, and I've had people when I work with them, sometimes they, you know, for the first step can take some time to get through if I'm meeting with them weekly, which is typically what I do. You know, it can take a number of, you know, it can take a couple of months actually to get through the first step. And so sometimes they relapse, or sometimes sponsors will relapse in step 4. That's can be common, and I do not start over if they happen to relapse. If they're in the middle of step 4 and they relapse, I do not go back to step 1. I simply, I mean, at least the way that it was described to me, and it seems to be my experience, is that sometimes step 4 can be difficult for people, and they might think they need some relief from that. And so typically what happens is they find out that that's not a solution anymore, and you know, they come back with a more willingness to continue. So that's typically what, at least my experience has been so far.
All right. Thank you for that. Any other? Okay. So then the last one here just talks about well, I mean, I think we covered it. I heard most of what Laura said. So just to be clear, the thing that we're trying to do as a sponsor is understand that they're still a sick alcoholic, regardless of how long they have or haven't been sober, and one or more slips. I've tried, and it doesn't, I mean, I have all sorts of faults in other places, but this one doesn't pop up very often. I've sort of given up the idea, like if I know if they're sincere or not. I just don't really care. You know what I mean? I'm like, because somewhere along the way, like the ones that I thought were totally on fire would flake out, and the ones that I thought were completely, you know, are still so I think for me, between these last 2 points that we had on this slide, the takeaway for me is like, it's just not my job to figure out where they're at. My job is just to be the sponsor, and then obviously if they slip or whatever, then to be supportive of it. But I mean, I just think about like the questions that I get from guys that are new in sponsoring other men is, they're all like, I'm like, look, man, we don't know. We don't know. I'm glad that you're excited. That's good, right? And it's awesome that two selfish guys like us are talking about some third person that isn't here. But like, other than that, we have no idea what's going to happen. Like it's above our pay grade. And I think, yeah, that's not a bad place to be. So, the A experience, what is literature success? The sponsor underscores that the fact is the A recovery program, not the sponsor's personality or position, that is important. Thus, the newcomer learns to rely on the A program and not the sponsor. And this one's a little bigger font, and I pulled it out because I think if I was going to say based on the time that I've been around and the fact is a quote unquote service position, and pulling it straight out of what did I see as the takeaway of how do you sponsor? This would be a really good one thing to have, you know, that it's the program, and I'll just speak for myself, not me, or some special aspect of me. It's the program, and I think that's I mean, it's obviously the truth of my life, but I think that ends up being really, really helpful, whether I end up quote unquote being the person's sponsor or not. And I think that's the message of AA that we're being asked to carry. So questions or comments on how do I sponsor? So I want to be respectful of folks' time. We said it was from 10 to 12. We have 4 minutes. There is another section that we haven't got to yet about how can we encourage sponsorship like activity. It's sort of written a little bit, if I can, sort of written for like the group, or if you wanted to get your home group involved. So we could look at that, or I was very confident that we would have a great workshop. I think that if we haven't gotten there, we're darn close. So like I said, I want to be respectful of folks' time. Is there a sense of where we are? Do folks want to continue? Do you want to stick close to our timeline?
Yeah, I think 2 hours is plenty.
Okay, awesome. All right, well then what I'll do is I'm gonna take this down because
Can we see the last slide?
What's that?
We don't have to talk about it, can we see it?
What's that?
The last slide.
Oh, it's a whole nother section.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Service. You know, one thing I did want to say though, real quick, is, bye Kristen, thanks for coming.
Mm-hmm.
I really, you know, sometimes it's really hard to find a sponsor who has worked the steps. What's that?
Like you ask people and they say yes, but then they never really work the steps?
Maybe, yeah, and then it's even more hard to find somebody who's a sponsor who's willing to teach people about the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Like that. Sometimes that, I mean, and you touched on all these things, and now we're talking about service sponsorship, or that we would have talked about that. So I think I don't know, I think it's only been the last, I want to say, you know, just, you know, until I got the current sponsor that I have now, and that I got a service sponsor, did I realize, wow, I need to like do all this stuff with, you know, like I could take you through the book and take you through the steps, and then, yeah, but I would never study the traditions with them. It's just like it's not something that I had done for years, really. I would go to tradition studies and they just sort of remained elusive sort of concepts, and that I knew had some depth and weight, but that I understood I didn't really understand. And so it's only been the last little while, really, that I've realized how important it is to carry the message of the 12 traditions to my sponsees, right? And right, and so so that's you know, that's something now that I incorporate with my sponsees, so that once we're through the book and through the steps, that we then start on studying the 12 traditions. So that, I think it's, especially if we want to, I mean, the old saying is, the quickest way to clear a room is, whip out start a tradition study, right? Like, but that's sad to me, right? Like, it's sad to me now. But, so, anyway, I think it's super important because, the future of Alcoholics Anonymous rests on, how well our newcomers and the people coming up understand the traditions and get involved in service.
So I'll put in one plug just as the third legacy guy, and it's just so incredibly consistent with my experience. So by just dumb blind luck and the grace of the universe, the guy that I asked to be my first sponsor was a DCM. And I actually attended a district meeting before I made it to my home group business meeting. And I was at an area quarterly before I was 90 days sober. And he talked about the 36 principles of Alcoholics Anonymous from the second I met him. And then unfortunately he stopped. And the final demonstration he gave me is like what happens when alcoholic stops doing what we do. But I had already sort of picked another sponsor, and he was the only person that I heard consistently talking about 36 principles of AA. So I was like, well, that's the guy I got to talk to. So that's my experience, and how it was explained to me, which I think is easier to take away, is the steps are fantastic because they help me get sober in a relationship with a higher power. The traditions are for two alcoholics to stay together. It's just more power. It's a little harder to apply, but it's more power. And then if you want to get really super, because Ross is super generous, the concepts are for groups of alcoholics to stay together. So there's just way more juice. And I'm such a greedy SOB that I'm like, get me that info, man. I want the juice. So they're a little harder to apply, but they're just as powerful and just as consistently effective when I apply them in my life, for sure.
And you can learn about the traditions and the concepts here at Seattle.
Oh my God, it's like, what a wrap up.
Yeah, because we want to see a room clear, making the concept.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, I'll get off the soapbox for a second. So we're probably a minute or two over time, but what I would love to do is first say thank you so much to everyone for coming. It was a great experience. I got some takeaways. I hope other folks did. I'd love to open it up if anyone has a burning desire or wants to share anything. I'd love to give someone a chance to share if they didn't get a chance to share or had something to say.
I just wanted to say that did you know that there's other states and other parts of the country that the sponsor goes right into the traditions? And I didn't know that. Somebody from Denver was telling me that, they would think that was a grievous error not to go through the traditions as well. And I'm just like, well, I've never heard of that. And so it's that. And then the concepts too. And I wanted to ask Laura, do you take them through the little illustrated book of the 12 traditions?
Yeah, we use AA Comes of Age, Language of the Heart, the 12 and 12, and 12 Traditions Illustrated, and the Traditions Checklist. Just to cover
AA Comes of Age.
Multiple places where that's what my current service sponsor has done with me, and I love it.
What was the other one? AA Comes of Age?
Yeah, Language of the Heart, AA Comes of Age, and there's the pamphlets.
All right. So thank you once again. And what I'd love to do, if there's no other burning desires, is just close with the responsibility statement. I will put up one last infomercial and just a reminder that we'll be doing this again in just about 90 days. And like I mentioned, when we opened, there's a few people, maybe more than a few, who've done more than one, and they're not the same. They're not the same, but I find them to be equally valuable, and that's because you guys do such a great job sharing, so thank you so much. And there's also some other things, whether it's the tradition study or the service manual, if you want to jump in on that, we'd love to see you there. And with that said, I'd say we can close with a responsibility statement. I am responsible.
I'm responsible when
Anyone-
anyone
Anyone,
anywhere
anywhere,
reaches out for help.
for help,
I want
I want the hands
to
always to be there.
and
For that,